Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. While spells are the flashiest and most recognizable part of the magical world, there are times when wands fall short. And that's when potions step in, ancient, mysterious, and, sometimes, utterly pointless. Some elixirs are indispensable for any self-respecting witch or wizard, while others leave us scratching our heads. Today we'll talk about those strange brews and the ones with questionable uses and even more questionable effects. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Gregory's Unctuous Unction. Let's start with a potion that might be useful. If morals weren't a thing, Gregory's Unctuous Unction. Invented by Gregory the Smarmy, its effect is straightforward. The drinker immediately sees the giver as their best friend. Convenient? Sure. Want a stranger to like you? Just offer them this elixir. But in a world where imperious exists, complete control over someone's will, or even love potions, the purpose of this brew becomes less clear. It only works on strangers too, making it extremely limited in scope. Amusing? Yes. Essential? Hardly. Number 2. Babbling beverage. Next, let's recall a truly absurd potion, the babbling beverage. It causes the drinker to spout nonsensical chatter, essentially spewing gibberish. It's first mentioned in Order of the Phoenix, when Snape snidely says to Harry, "I have no idea. If I wanted nonsense, Potter, I'd give you babbling beverage." It never made it into the films, but just imagine something like Evan Baxter from Bruce Almighty. Hilarious, maybe, but what's the point? Especially considering that the babbling curse already exists and achieves the same effect. No brewing required. It's redundant, and frankly, a bit dumb. Number 3. Spiky-haired potion. Our parade of nonsense continues with the spiky-haired potion. It does exactly what it says, makes your hair stand on end. That's it. Mentioned in Chamber of Secrets, it's taught as part of the Hogwarts curriculum. Yes, Hogwarts genuinely teaches kids to brew something you could replicate with static from a plastic pen. You could prank someone, sure, turn their hairstyle into a hedgehog, or maybe use it as magical hair gel, but even by wizarding standards, this one feels like a joke in a bottle. Number 4. Pumpkin potion. Now we move into the truly bizarre, the pumpkin potion. First appearing in the video game Lego Harry Potter, years 1-4 players brew it for Snape. Its effect? It turns your head into a pumpkin, that's all. Considering transfiguration is a basic subject at Hogwarts and wizards can change objects and people, with a flick of a wand, this potion feels completely unnecessary. Why would anyone voluntarily turn their head into a pumpkin? Unless it's Halloween, of course, for the vibes. Number 5. Aging potion. Here's one we've actually seen in action. The aging potion. In Goblet of Fire, the Weasley twins tried to bypass the age line by aging themselves with this brew. It didn't work. The goblet spotted the trick. And that's the end of it. Which begs the question, when would this potion ever be useful again? For changing one's appearance, there's the Polyjuice potion. Far more versatile. Voluntarily aging yourself sounds like a stretch. Who wants to look older, especially permanently? Maybe just to buy something at a wizarding adults-only shop. Number 6. Barufio's Brain Elixir. Finally, a potion that sounds useful but raises plenty of doubts. Barufio's Brain Elixir. It's said to boost brain power and enhance mental abilities. Sounds perfect. But, first, there's no evidence in the books that it actually works. Second, respected potion expert Madam Pince says it's more likely to scramble your brains than sharpen them. And third, no one at Hogwarts ever uses it. If the elixir had any real effect, students would be chugging it before exams, but they don't, which means it's either useless, dangerous, or both. Number 7. Hiccuping solution. It started in the Hogwarts Express. A third-year Hufflepuff named Eric Mudge thought he'd be clever. He passed a vial of hiccuping potion to a first-year Ravenclaw, claiming it was pumpkin juice with a kick. 10 seconds later, the poor boy was hiccuping so violently he knocked over 3 chocolate frogs and dropped his wand under the seat. "Make it stop," he squeaked between spasms. But there's no quick counterspell. The only cure is time and regret. The potion first appears in The Prisoner of Azkaban during a brief scene when students are trading joke items. It's treated like a harmless gag until someone actually drinks it. The hiccups come fast, loud, and uncontrollable. They disrupt class, make spellcasting nearly impossible, and occasionally trigger accidental hexes. Professor Flitwick once had to cancel a charms lesson after a girl hiccuped mid-Wingardium Leviosa and launched a desk into the ceiling. "Absolutely uncalled for," he muttered, brushing plaster from his robes. The real absurdity of the potion is its pointlessness. In a world where Rictus Sempra can collapse a person in giggles, or Petrificus Totalis can freeze them stiff, why create a potion that only makes someone mildly annoying? It's not powerful, it's not creative, it doesn't even last long enough to ruin a whole day, just long enough to ruin a moment. And in the world of magic, that barely earns it a shrug. Number 8. Moaning Myrtle's Sleep Draught. Lavender Brown took one sip and dropped her quill mid-sentence. Her eyes fluttered shut, and her head thudded softly against the table in the common room. "Is she asleep?" Neville whispered. "Looks like it," said Hermione, not even looking up. "Probably that ridiculous draught Myrtle keeps going on about." Sure enough, 2 minutes later, Lavender sat up groggily, blinked, and groaned. "Why do I feel worse than before?" Moaning Myrtle's Sleep Draught is mentioned in passing in Hogwarts, a history, supplemental editions, as one of several potions the ghost claimed to have perfected in her time, haunting the second-floor bathroom. The problem isn't just the speed, it knocks the drinker out within seconds, but the absurdly short duration. Most users report waking up even more tired, often confused, and with a splitting headache. Professor Sprout once described it as the nap equivalent of tripping on a staircase. Compared to the draught of living death, or even a simple somnum charm, Myrtle's version is laughable. It doesn't heal, it doesn't restore, it doesn't even relax. Ron once joked that it felt like someone knocked you out with a pillow, then shouted in your ear to wake you up again. No one in their right mind would brew it for practical use. When asked if she regretted developing such a potion, Myrtle simply replied, "Well, it worked on me." Which might be true if you count centuries of floating through lavatories, moaning as the gold standard of restful sleep. For everyone else, her sleepy time brew remains a short, disappointing pause in a much longer and more exhausting day. Number 9. Dancing Tonic. Lee Jordan thought it would make the Yule Ball unforgettable, and it did for all the wrong reasons. Just before the music began, he handed Seamus Finnegan a goblet laced with dancing tonic. "Just a little extra groove," he winked. At first, Seamus swayed with the rhythm. Then he started spinning, then kicking, then without warning, flailing across the dance floor like a bewitched marionette. Parvati Patil screamed. Hannah Abbott ducked a flying elbow. "Make it stop!" Seamus howled between involuntary jazz hands. The tonic is mentioned briefly in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, in a footnote on misused magical substances. The effect? Hours of uncontrolled, often chaotic dancing. Not elegant waltzing, not charming footwork, pure physical chaos. McGonagall was livid. "This isn't choreography, it's carnage," she shouted over the stunned band. Filch had to mop up spilled punch and 3 torn dress robes by morning. What makes the tonic so ridiculous is that wizards already have a spell that forces dancing. Tarantalegra, powerful, quick, and easy to counter. No brewing, no mess. The potion, however, overstays its welcome, and its side effects include joint pain, dizziness, and one Hufflepuff spraining his hip in second year. "Never again," he muttered. "I danced through lunch." George Weasley once considered bottling it as chaotic Charleston for Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, but even he gave up. "Too dangerous," he said, "and that's coming from a man who sold canary creams." A potion that turns joy into humiliation, laughter into injury, and parties into war zones doesn't belong on any shelf. except maybe as a warning. Number 10. Sneezing syrup. Cho Chang sneezed 5 times in a row before she could finish her sentence. It was supposed to be a quiet conversation with Marietta Edgecombe in the library. But someone had laced her tea with sneezing syrup. Her nose twitched, her eyes watered, and every attempt at whispering turned into a fit of uncontrollable, thunderous sneezes. Madame Pince appeared from behind the shelves like a banshee. "Out!" she snapped, brandishing her feather duster like a sword. Cho barely had time to grab her bag before another sneeze bent her double. The syrup was mentioned once in the Book of Spells by Miranda Goshawk, described as a childish concoction brewed mostly for mischief, rarely for purpose. And that's the truth of it. No student has ever claimed to use it in duels, exams, or actual prank wars, not when a tickling charm or a simple jelly-legs jinx could do far more damage with less mess. The problem with sneezing syrup is that it does exactly one thing, loudly, repeatedly, and predictably. Even Fred and George, connoisseurs of magical nonsense, once gave it a go. They slipped a dose into Percy Weasley's pumpkin pasty during lunch. He sneezed so hard he launched the entire prefect schedule across the Great Hall. Professor Snape, unimpressed, confiscated the rest of the batch on the spot. "Childish," he muttered, "and beneath even you two." No lasting charm, no clever twist, just endless sneezing and red faces. In a world of magical tricks and spectacular enchantments, sneezing syrup is the equivalent of a whoopee cushion. If the cushion shouted in Latin and sprayed pumpkin juice, funny once, never again. Number 11, sparkling teeth elixir. It was midnight when Dennis Creevey stumbled into the Gryffindor common room, grinning from ear to ear, literally glowing. His teeth, enchanted by a vial of Sparkle Smile elixir he'd bought on a dare from a second-year Ravenclaw, lit up the room like Lumos charms gone wrong. "I look brilliant, don't I?" he beamed. Hermione looked up from her arithmancy chart and dropped her quill. "You look like a broken chandelier," she muttered. Even nearly headless Nick did a double take as Dennis smiled into the fireplace, his reflection bouncing off the iron grate. The elixir wasn't designed to whiten teeth. It made them glow, bright white with a bluish pulse, the kind of glow that could wake a sleeping hippogriff. Professor McGonagall wasn't impressed. 10 points from Gryffindor for excessive dental enthusiasm, she said, the next morning, shielding her eyes. It turns out the potion's effects lasted a full 12 hours. Dennis had to skip astronomy class after the centaur Professor Ferenzi refused to let him near the star charts. "Your smile disrupts the sky," he calmly noted. "There are better ways to improve your appearance in the wizarding world. Cosmetic charms, whitening potions, even a simple dental cleaning hex. The Sparkle Smile elixir serves no purpose other than drawing unwanted attention. Fred and George briefly considered selling it at their shop, but even they abandoned the idea. "Too flashy," George said, "and that's coming from us." The potion remains one of the most useless novelties ever brewed. It doesn't heal, it doesn't help, it doesn't even make you look good, unless your goal is to blind everyone in the room. And as Ron Weasley once said after Dennis grinned during breakfast and reflected sunlight off his teeth straight into Ron's porridge, "If he smiles at me one more time, I'm hexing his molars straight out of his mouth." Number 12. Uncontrollable laughter. Potion? Seamus Finnegan thought it would be funny. He slipped a vial of laughter draft into Dean Thomas's pumpkin juice during breakfast. The effect was immediate. Dean burst out laughing, first at nothing, then at everything. He laughed when the post owls flew in. He laughed when Neville knocked over the milk. He even laughed when Hermione snapped, "This isn't funny, Dean. Ron just broke his wand." Dean keeled over, wheezing with glee, while Ron clutched his smouldering wand tip, furious. "What's so bloody hilarious?" he barked. But Dean couldn't stop. His laugh turned manic, hollow, almost painful. Madame Pomfrey was not amused. She had seen cases before. Laughter draft, though rarely used, was still listed in advanced potion making as a warning, not a suggestion. "There is no known antidote," she reminded Seamus grimly. "Only patience and silence." It took 6 hours for the effects to wear off. Dean's ribs ached for 2 days. The memory of him chuckling uncontrollably during a surprise fire drill stayed with the Gryffindor common room for weeks. No one dared try it again. The strangest part about the potion is how unnecessary it feels. Wizards already have the tickling charm, Rictus Sempra, which can induce laughter and stop on command. Even a simple joke from Luna Lovegood is safer. But the laughter draft? It robs the moment of control. A person might break into hysterics at a funeral, or during a defense against the dark arts practical. What begins as amusement quickly turns into embarrassment. Professor Flitwick once called it a potion with no proper stage. He was right. It doesn't belong in duels, lessons, or daily life. It turns joy into discomfort. And yet, like many things in the wizarding world, someone still brews it. Whether for revenge, mischief, or sheer idiocy, the laughter draft remains locked behind a cabinet in the potions classroom, chained, dusty, and hopefully forgotten. Number 13, Stink Bomb Brew. The stench hit Neville Longbottom before he turned the corner. A foul, unholy mix of rotten eggs, spoiled fish, and something far worse, something that didn't belong in this world. "Ugh, what is that?" he gagged, pressing a hand over his nose. The culprit? A broken vial of the infamous stench brew, an unofficial name for a potion whispered about in Hufflepuff dorms and snickered over in the Slytherin common room. Rumour had it that Marcus Flint once slipped a vial into Alicia Spinett's satchel before flying practice. She passed out mid-air, and it took Madam Hooch a full hour to clear the Quidditch pitch of the odour. Stench brew never made it into any official Hogwarts curriculum. Most students only knew of it through rumour, passed down like a twisted heirloom. Brewing it was reportedly as unpleasant as the result. The mixture had to simmer with raw fish guts and pickled troll toenails for a week, and its fumes were said to permanently cling to cauldrons. "If I ever catch someone brewing that filth again," Professor Snape once snapped, "they'll scrub every cauldron in the dungeon with their eyebrows." No one volunteered to test his threat. What made the potion so useless wasn't just the smell, it was how easily its effects could be replaced by magic. A simple repello charm or a minor illusion spell could drive people away just as effectively, and with far more dignity. Even Peeves, who once used it to sabotage the library, ended up regretting it when the stench clung to him for a week. "Filch threatened to mop me," he wailed, hovering behind a suit of armour. To this day, no student has ever admitted to brewing it. Yet the tale survives, a potion so vile even Fred and George Weasley refused to stock it at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. "We've got standards," George once said. "Low ones, but standards." Number 14, Eternal Belch Elixir. It was stored on the very top shelf in the back room of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, sealed in an unlabelled, mucus-coloured vial, secured behind a series of rusting padlocks that had not been touched since 2004. The vial had no price tag, no promotional sign, and when George Weasley was once asked about it, he muttered something about that cursed burping business and quickly changed the subject to extendable ears. The elixir of eternal burping was, without doubt, the most regrettable creation ever to come from the post-war boom of magical experimentation. The potion had no officially sanctioned recipe, and the only known batch was brewed during an experimental phase at the joke shop shortly after Fred's death. George, left to invent laughter alone, became obsessed with pushing the boundaries of magical comedy, and in this creative desperation he formulated what he would later call his worst idea since the Dancing Pox Donuts. It began as a dare from Lee Jordan, who insisted George could make something so hilariously awful that even a Dementor might smirk. The result was a shimmering concoction that looked like liquefied dragon snot and smelled faintly of sulphur and cornflakes. When tested on a pumpkin named Nigel, the results were catastrophic. The pumpkin let out a deep, rumbling belch that echoed through the shop like a foghorn with laryngitis. Then it exploded. George, impressed but not discouraged, scaled the dose for humans, unaware that he had inadvertently created a potion with no natural half-life. Anyone who drank it would begin to burp uncontrollably and never stop. The sound wasn't always traditional either. Sometimes it would imitate an opera singer. Other times it produced sounds resembling a bagpipe being strangled. According to one intern, who later confessed under veritaserum, the potion once caused a burp so loud it shattered every sneaker scope in a 3-block radius. There was a moment, a brief and foolish moment, when George thought this might be his next bestseller. The product was dubbed Belch Beyond Reason, and it was marketed under the short-lived line, The Unforgivables of Humour. Promotional flyers were mailed to Hogwarts, Durmstrang, and even Ilvermorny, though the latter promptly issued a restraining order. George hired a young artist from Diagon Alley to illustrate a cartoon of Dolores Umbridge being levitated off the ground by the force of her own burp. The slogan beneath read, "More shocking than your OWL results." But what seemed like a stroke of comedic genius soon turned into a public health concern. A fourth-year Gryffindor named Barry Tweedle purchased a bottle with his pocket money and drank it at breakfast. His first burp sounded like a trombone with a cold. The second resembled Professor Snape snarling the word detention. The third, a perfect imitation of Fawkes the Phoenix mid-resurrection, sent the great hall into chaos. Barry was removed from school grounds when it became apparent that the sounds would not cease and that no spell, charm, or anti-noise ward could muffle them. Barry's case was referred to St. Mungo's, where healers were baffled. They consulted with the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, who in turn contacted the Department of Experimental Charms. Eventually, the case was passed to Magical Musical Phenomena, a department so obscure it was once staffed entirely by ghosts. None could explain it. The elixir had no antidote. Barry was eventually fitted with a charm-powered silencing bubble which floated over his head like a glass dome and dampened his belches into faint, whale-like sighs. It might have been the end of the elixir of eternal burping, if not for a brief scandal during the 2007 Quidditch World Cup. A group of Bulgarian fans, having heard of the potion through underground joke shop flyers, brought a crate into the stadium disguised as pumpkin juice. What followed was an auditory assault so profound that Victor Crumb was visibly shaken mid-match, muttering afterward to the Daily Prophet, "I thought I heard my grandmother cursing me from the clouds." The crate was confiscated, and the ministry began cataloguing joke products as potential auditory weaponry. Luna Lovegood, reporting on the event for the Quibbler, described the potion's effects as a sonic disruption of the Nagel spectrum, and noted that some of the burps carried within them words that were not human. "I'm quite certain one of them whispered the secret name of a crumple-horned snorkack," she wrote. This prompted Xenophilius Lovegood to theorize that the potion had somehow breached a vocal portal between dimensions. George, reading the article, muttered that Luna was closer to the truth than she knew, and quietly locked the remaining vials away. Some whispered that the elixir was cursed, not just magically flawed. A former employee of the shop, Gregory Plimp, claimed the potion had a vengeful streak. He described how he once spilled a drop on his wand hand and couldn't speak a single sentence for weeks without involuntarily releasing a thunderous belch halfway through. "It wasn't even funny," he told a reporter. "My girlfriend left me. My owl refused to come near me. I once burped in my sleep and set off 3 alarm wards in my own flat." Despite all of this, the potion found a small, cult-like following among aspiring underground wizards bands. One such group, Snitch and Gurgle, used the elixir to perform a concert in Nocturne Alley. The main act involved the lead singer drinking a vial and using the resulting noises as improvised vocals. While the audience was small, it included at least one unspeakable who took notes and later requested a sample for departmental study. George refused. "I'm not giving that thing to the unspeakables," he said. "I'm mad, not suicidal." Number 15, Bubblehead Potion, game version. No one truly remembers who brewed the first head bubble potion. Perhaps it was a bored 7th-year Ravenclaw experimenting during a rainy weekend in the astronomy tower. Or maybe a careless apprentice at St. Mungo's mixed the wrong ingredients while treating a patient with gillyweed withdrawal. What we do know is that the potion did not grace the pages of advanced potion making, nor was it whispered about in the shadowy corners of the restricted section. Its sole appearance in magical history is in a training exercise featured in the Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince video game, a place where oddities are born and often forgotten. After drinking the head bubble potion, the effect is both immediate and preposterous. A translucent, shimmering soap bubble expands from the top of the drinker's head, encasing the entire face in a glistening globe. Though breathable and apparently harmless, it gives the user the look of someone who's mistakenly replaced their cranium with a dishwashing globe. It's the sort of result that would make Severus Snape raise an eyebrow and then deduct 10 points from Gryffindor simply for existing in the same room as such nonsense. The potion's alleged utility is underwater breathing, a noble goal considering how many witches and wizards struggle with gillyweed or complex bubblehead charms. But therein lies the potion's downfall. It is, at best, an aesthetic disaster, and at worst, a useless, embarrassing alternative to much more elegant solutions. The magical world has long relied on the bubblehead charm, a spell taught as early as 5th year for underwater expeditions and journeys through noxious air. Even Neville Longbottom could cast it by his 7th year, so why would anyone choose to drink a syrupy concoction that makes them look like a carnival balloon animal? Horace Slughorn, were he alive to test it in a formal academic setting, would likely have dismissed it outright. Known for his preference for elegant, effective potions, Felix Felicis, Amatentia, Draught of Living Death, Slughorn often emphasized dignity in the practice of potioneering. Magic is not merely power, he once told his NEWT students, but presentation. There's nothing presentable about waddling around with a glistening soap orb bouncing on your shoulders. During the video game's potion lessons, players were tasked with preparing a batch of this ludicrous liquid under the guidance of a poorly rendered Professor Slughorn, boiling doxy eggs, crushing pufferfish eyes, and stirring until the potion shimmered like oily dishwater. These were the steps that led to the final result. Once consumed, the animation would show the player character's head pop into a wobbly, iridescent bubble with curious sparkles dancing across its surface. No added skills, no enhanced mobility, no resistance to water pressure, just a floating embarrassment of a helmet. The game, of course, never explained why anyone would use this in the field. There's no mention of it in the books. Neither Dumbledore nor Lupin ever referenced it in conversation, and certainly not during any combat or underwater missions. In fact, when Harry dove into the lake during the Triwizard Tournament, he relied on gillyweed provided by Dobby or Neville, depending on which adaptation you prefer. There was no mention of a potion turning his face into a soap bubble. That omission speaks volumes. Imagine instead if Harry had swallowed this ridiculous brew before swimming into the depths of the Great Lake. The merpeople, already wary of outsiders, would have burst into watery laughter. The Grindylows might have mistaken the head bubble for a lure or floating food source, and Fleur Delacour? She might have abandoned her sister and forfeited the task entirely just to avoid being seen next to a competitor sporting a magical fishbowl as a head accessory. The magical properties of the bubble remain mysterious. While it does allow for normal breathing, it offers no enhanced visibility, no enchantment to withstand underwater currents, and no voice projection. Speaking inside, it causes the sound to muffle like someone shouting from the bottom of a well wrapped in cotton. In dueling situations, it could become a serious liability. If a Death Eater cast a bludgeoning hex, the potion's user might find their soap dome shattered like glass, water rushing into their lungs. In the long and often bizarre history of magical inventions, the head bubble potion stands as one of the few concoctions that seems to mock the very principles of potion making. At least the elixir to induce euphoria, while unpredictable, served a purpose. Even the love potions flooding Weasley's wizard wheezes had targeted effects despite their moral ambiguity. The head bubble potion? It's as if a group of second years decided to prank the entire curriculum and no one stopped them. Consider the work of Damocles Belby, inventor of the Wolfsbane potion. He spent years developing a brew that, while bitter and foul, gave werewolves the ability to retain their minds during full moons. That's a potion with purpose, impact, and legacy. In contrast, the head bubble potion is the equivalent of fireworks in a bottle. Bright, brief, and best left in a cupboard labelled miscellaneous failures. There's also the social factor. Imagine arriving to a group dive into the Black Lake alongside Luna Lovegood, who would no doubt embrace the potion for its sheer whimsy. But what about Hermione Granger, meticulous and rational? She would likely cite magical drafts and potions and refuse to associate with anyone who deliberately altered their appearance into that of a walking detergent bubble. Ron Weasley predictably would drink it on a dare, then regret it the moment he caught his reflection. In fact, had Fred and George gotten their hands on this recipe, one suspects they would have renamed it Dish Head Delight and sold it as a gag item. They would have marketed it to gullible first years or unsuspecting prefects, but as a serious potion, even Peeves the poltergeist would consider it beneath him. Number 16, Roaring Potion. Roaring Potion was never meant to be useful. That much is clear from the moment one examines the scrawled margin note in the addendum to the Tales of Beedle the Bard, where a certain potion named Vox Rugitus is mentioned only once, accompanied by a hesitant question mark and the briefest of explanations. Voice becomes uncontrollably thunderous. Its creator, a little-known potioneer named Belvedere Crumb, lived during the tail end of the 14th century and was best known in his time for attempting to brew potions with emotional personality. He once tried to make tea that wept when drunk, and another draught that blushed red when it was tasted. Most of his experiments were deemed entertaining but impractical by his contemporaries, and Vox Rugitus, or the Roaring Potion, was quietly shelved alongside his recipe for whispering butter and giggle grease. To consume Roaring Potion is to surrender one's voice to an unstoppable force. It magnifies every utterance into a brutal, leonine bellow that ricochets through corridors and rattles window panes. Even a simple greeting, hello, erupts like a battle cry. According to fragments of Crumb's notes, the potion was originally conceived as a means to command attention in crowded taverns. But as any frequent visitor to the Leaky Cauldron might attest, a wand-tip sonorous does the job far better, with the added benefit of being reversible. Once the Roaring Potion is ingested, there is no adjusting the volume, no whispering secrets, no apologies murmured in shame. Every sound is a blast. The most well-documented case of its modern appearance occurred at Hogwarts in 1873, when a fourth-year Ravenclaw named Petronilla Cubbins found an unlabelled vial tucked between volumes in the restricted section. The potion had been mistakenly placed inside a copy of Moste Potente Potions, wedged near the recipe for elixir to induce euphoria. Thinking it was something else entirely, Petronilla drank the shimmering gold liquid in the middle of Transfiguration. The classroom's tranquil murmur was shattered by what sounded like a banshee's war cry. "I finished the homework," she shouted, unintentionally, and caused Professor Lintwhistle to fall off his stool. The effect lasted 6 hours, during which time Petronilla attempted to communicate only by writing on a chalkboard she carried under her arm. Albus Dumbledore once referred to the Roaring Potion in a footnote in his commentary on the Tales of Beedle the Bard, calling it one of those remarkable yet utterly impractical concoctions that reminds us of the limits of magical innovation without purpose. It is difficult to disagree, unlike Polyjuice Potion, which transforms the very identity of its user, or Felix Felicis, which bestows the tantalizing edge of good fortune. The Roaring Potion delivers nothing but chaos. It offers no subtlety, no tactical advantage, no joy. It is all bellow and no benefit. Yet for all its absurdity, the Roaring Potion holds a strange place in the history of magical experimentation. It demonstrates, in its own cacophonous way, the perils of pushing magic too far for too little. Belvedere Crumb, a man obsessed with the expressive potential of alchemy, documented his belief that sound is the soul's shout. He theorized that magical potions could amplify more than just physical traits. They could externalize internal states. One early draft of the potion was intended to make whispers carry across mountains, but it instead produced a noise so intense that several owls reportedly exploded mid-flight. In 1921, the potion surfaced again in Nocturne Alley. A street magician named Gully Hart was selling it in tiny vials labelled Lion's Voice, Command the Masses. Several unsuspecting buyers, mostly tourists from the continent, were seen howling in confusion near Borgin and Berks. Within an hour, 4 people had been fined for unlicensed magical disruption, and 1 was arrested for causing structural damage to a chimney. Hart disappeared soon after, and no further bottles were found, though some believe a few remain in circulation, hidden among curiosity shops and attic trunks. The most curious thing about the Roaring Potion is its continued existence in wizarding folklore. It appears in more than one children's rhyme, "Don't sip the raw or speak no more, your friends will flee and slam the door." It is taught at Hogwarts in advanced potion theory only as a cautionary tale. Professor Slughorn once demonstrated it in class by dripping a sample onto a mouse, which then squeaked so violently it dislodged 2 floor tiles and had to be removed from the premises. And yet some have argued that the potion might possess a sliver of utility. The argument is usually raised in jest. "Could frighten off a burglar," muttered Mad-Eye Moody in one of his more sarcastic lessons on unpredictability and magical defense, "or maybe just wake the whole neighborhood and give your location away." The issue lies not only in the potion's volume, but its uncontrollability. Sonorous, for instance, allows the speaker to raise and lower volume at will. It can be ended with a quiet quietus. The Roaring Potion has no off switch. One must wait for it to wear off, which can take from 1 to 12 hours depending on dosage, body mass, and magical resistance. There is something hauntingly humorous in the image of a wizard attempting stealth with a voice like thunder. Imagine a duelist trying to cast Expelliarmus only for the word to erupt like a sonic boom. The wand would fly from his opponent's hand, but so might his own eardrums. The recoil alone could cause structural damage in an enclosed space. One can only guess what effect the potion might have if consumed during a performance of the Hogwarts choir. Would the frogs keep up? Even Fred and George Weasley, famed for their love of magical mayhem, steered clear of developing products based on the Roaring Potion. When asked about it in an interview for Witch Weekly, George simply said, "We thought about it, but there's no fun in something you can't control. The trick is in the timing, not just the noise." Coming from pranksters who invented puking pastilles and Tung toffee, this speaks volumes about how genuinely unmanageable the potion is. Number 17. Tactlessness. Tonic. There are few potions brewed in the wizarding world that command less respect, serve fewer practical uses, and yet leave behind a trail of unforgettable memories, quite like the Tactlessness draft. If Felix Felicis is a shimmering golden symbol of perfection and Veritaserum the tool of austere truth, then this particular brew is their unhinged, ill-mannered cousin, bursting into rooms like an intoxicated banshee, blurting out truths no one asked for and opinions best left unspoken. Designed, if one can call it that, with no medicinal, defensive, or practical benefit in mind, the Tactlessness draft is the masterpiece of social sabotage. Its rare uses usually center on magical pranks, those so daring and reckless that even the Weasley twins might raise an eyebrow. One cannot speak of the Tactlessness draft without invoking the infamous incident in the dungeons of Hogwarts during the tenure of Professor Septimus Darracot, a minor character in school history who managed with one sip to become the subject of whispered recollections and staff-room chuckles for decades. A thin man with a fondness for tweed cloaks and complex brews, Darracot was the kind of potions master who insisted on perfect cauldron temperatures and would dock house points for slicing knotgrass at the wrong angle. But even the most meticulous brewer can fall victim to a poorly labelled shelf and a late-night grading session. One Monday morning, expecting a pick-me-up in the form of a standard invigoration draft, Darracot instead downed 3 ounces of the Tactlessness potion and proceeded to teach his NEWT potions class with devastating results. He began with a snide observation about one student's hair, a nest suitable only for Cornish pixies, and proceeded to tear into another's cauldron work as a muddy disgrace to the noble science of potion-making. Eyebrows were insulted, voices were mocked, one unfortunate Ravenclaw was accused of having the intellectual depth of a flobberworm's breakfast. Darricotte didn't stop until the end of the lesson, where he punctuated his lecture with the proud declaration that Gryffindors had as much subtlety as a charging troll. Even his own house, Slytherin, didn't escape unscathed. He referred to them as a self-important lot of green-tied drama queens. When the potion finally wore off, he was greeted with icy silence and a record number of formal complaints to Headmistress Minerva McGonagall. He was quietly reassigned to research work in St. Mungo's lower laboratories by the end of term. Brewing the Tactlessness draught requires a bizarre list of ingredients: powdered chicken bone, fermented essence of skunk cabbage, and a few drops of gurdy root extract, all mixed in a clockwise stir until the surface fizzes violet. It is said that the potion emits a faint scent of burnt toast and bad decisions. No reputable apothecary stocks it, and its appearance in any household is usually accompanied by laughter, concern, or outright alarm. Not listed in any standard textbook, certainly not in advanced potion-making by Libatius Borage, it exists in the margins of magical literature, often scribbled in as a footnote or a prank anecdote, and yet, despite its absurdity, the Tactlessness draught has not been outlawed. The Ministry of Magic, in its usual ambivalence toward magical mischief, has not deemed it dangerous, merely socially disruptive. Magical pranksters have occasionally sought it out, most notably Fred and George Weasley, who once attempted to slip a diluted version of the potion into Percy Weasley's pumpkin juice during a family dinner. The attempt failed. Percy, already inclined toward awkward bluntness, only became slightly more insufferable. George was later heard saying, "We should have just used a silencing charm and called it a day." There is a curious psychology behind the potion. Under its effects, the drinker is unaware of their rudeness. Rather, they experience a surge of confidence, a sense of clarity and conviction in their words. It is not that they lose the ability to be kind, it is that they become convinced kindness is irrelevant. To them, truth and wit become indistinguishable, and every cruel remark seems like a necessary revelation. This subtle mental twist is what makes the potion so insidious. The victim becomes their worst self, unfiltered and proud of it. Hogwarts house elves have long refused to store the potion in the school's kitchens. According to an old note found in the records of the House Elf Oversight Committee, a small vial was once misplaced near the butterbeer stocks, leading to a 3-hour outburst from an otherwise sweet elf named Nibsy, who proceeded to call the headmaster's robes a mouldy rug sewn by a blind mole. Since then, all prank potions are stored separately under goblin-supervised lock and key. In an obscure issue of the Practical Potioneer, dated 1913, a short article described the Tactlessness draught as the least useful potion ever brewed unless one's goal is total ostracism. It recounted a disastrous experiment conducted by a group of Durmstrang alumni who had hoped to use the potion to promote radical honesty during a magical diplomatic summit. The result was an international incident involving accusations of poor hygiene, incompetent spellwork, and a duel that singed the eyebrows of the Latvian Minister for Magical Affairs. Madame Pince, the stern and silent librarian of Hogwarts, once confiscated a student's parchment on which was scribbled a modified recipe of the Tactlessness draught enhanced with peppermint for pleasant delivery. The student in question, a fifth-year Slytherin with a penchant for chaos named Alaric Flint, claimed he was merely researching its rhetorical applications. The scroll remains in the restricted section, rumoured to be annotated in red ink by none other than Severus Snape, who scrawled in the margin, "Utterly idiotic. Use veritaserum if you insist on being unpleasant." Snape himself, it should be noted, had no known use for the Tactlessness draught. He needed no potion to make students cry. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, we see his natural talent for unnerving pupils. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion-making. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even put a stopper in death if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." No potion needed there. And yet, one wonders if he ever kept a sample around, simply to compare it with his own brand of scathing commentary. The Weasley twins, of course, were fascinated by it. While it never made it into the shelves of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, internal notes from their early product brainstorming sessions include a reference to potion of utter bluntness for when your mate needs to hear the truth, hard and fast. The prototype was reportedly shelved after an intern at the shop declared that Angelina Johnson's laugh sounded like a mandrake with hiccups, which nearly resulted in hexes flying over the joke cauldron. Beyond Hogwarts, there are very few documented uses of the potion. One curious case occurred in the 1960s at a wedding between two prominent wizarding families, the Macmillans and the Montmorencys. An eccentric uncle, believing the potion to be a harmless cordial, served it to the bride's side of the family during the toast. What followed was an avalanche of embarrassing revelations, unspoken grudges, and scathing remarks about hat choices, family wealth, and wand lengths. The marriage survived, barely. The uncle was never invited to another event. It is unclear who first invented the Tactlessness draught. Some apothecaries believe it was a failed experiment in the field of emotional liberation, intended to help repressed wizards express their feelings. Others argue it was crafted deliberately by court jesters in the age of the magical Renaissance, when speaking unfiltered truth could be both comic and cathartic. There are references in the journals of Vindictus Viridian, most famous for curses and counter-curses, to a potion known as the Fool's Tongue, which historians now believe may be an early form of the Tactlessness draught. Hermione Granger once warned against the use of such potions in student pranks, stating in a prefect meeting during her 6th year that magic affecting someone's behavior, especially their speech, without consent, is not only unethical, but dangerous. Her voice of reason was not always heeded, of course, particularly by Ron, who reportedly once muttered, "Would have come in handy when dealing with Snape." There was one dark tale from the archives of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where a wizard named Arlo Thimble used the potion during a trial to speak freely. He was on trial for minor wand misuse. The potion turned his testimony into a character assassination of every judge on the panel. His sentence doubled, and he was barred from entering the ministry premises without supervision. The file is sealed, but an Aura trainee once described it as an explosion in a porcupine's den, sharp, chaotic, and deeply regrettable. Even in the classroom, professors tend to avoid mentioning the Tactlessness draught. Slughorn, ever the collector of charm and charisma, dismissed it in his lessons with a mere wave of the hand. "Too impolite," he once said. "One must maintain mystery, not madness." The potion does, however, have one strange and unexpected application in magical literature. Writers suffering from creative block have been known to sip a thimbleful, scribble in a manic frenzy, and later sift through the wreckage for ideas. One best-selling romance novelist claims her best villain monologues come from the wild ravings of a tactless tongue. In the end, the Tactlessness draught serves as a peculiar warning in potion making. Not all brews are useful, not all magic is wise. Sometimes the mere ability to do something doesn't mean one should. For a potion that guarantees offense, loneliness, and embarrassment, it continues to hold a certain mystique, a forbidden laugh, a dangerous dare, a liquid catastrophe, sealed in a bottle. Number 18, Glassy Gaze Potion. In the cluttered back archives of the Daily Prophet, among tales of self-combing wigs and self-buttering toast, there is a nearly forgotten entry dated October 4th, 1897. The piece, printed on yellowing parchment in a column titled Curiosities of the Cauldron, describes a strange, seldom-used potion brewed by eccentric apothecary Merton Bletchley, who claimed he had created a potion for poets, statues, and spies. He called it the Draught of the Glassy Gaze. What Bletchley imagined would be a revolution in magical expression ended up being, at best, a failed experiment in cosmetic vanity, and at worst, a mild public health hazard. The potion's sole purpose is to alter the drinker's eyes, causing them to appear misty, greyed, and devoid of expression, like those of a marble statue, or worse, a mannequin in a cursed department store window. The glassy gaze is precisely that, empty, unfeeling, artificial. No real magic infuses the body, no insight is offered. The only transformation is a cosmetic one, and even that is dubious. The side effects, however, are much more tangible: blurriness of vision, disorientation, and a sense of internal vertigo that has led more than one unfortunate witch to stumble face first into a fireplace. Merton Bletchley's own niece, Euphemia Trottle, once took the potion before a public dueling demonstration in hopes of intimidating her opponents with what she called an abyssal stare. Instead, she missed her cue, walked into the wrong arena, and attempted to hex a mirror she believed was her adversary. The crowd laughed, and the Prophet's next edition offered a scathing headline: "Dueling Disaster, Witch Curses Self After Looking Too Deep into Her Own Eyes." The effect of the potion was, to many, more eerie than dramatic. Professor Pintz once confiscated a vial of it from a group of fifth-year students attempting to use it for a performance art piece in the restricted section. The resulting portraits from the event showed the students staring blankly into space, their pupils clouded, their faces pale and utterly without effect. It was like watching ghosts pretend to be alive, she would later say in a private note to Professor McGonagall. The note is now kept in the Hogwarts archives, referenced only in the case of disciplinary proceedings involving improper potion use. There was a brief resurgence in popularity during the 1990s when a few underground wizarding fashion circles embraced the aesthetic of magical blankness. A little-known designer named Silas Grubb launched a line of enchanted robes titled Visions of Vacancy, featuring models who had imbibed the Glassy gaze draft before each runway walk. The robes shimmered in soft greys and whites, meant to evoke fog and stone. The effect, however, was unsettling rather than stylish. One spectator described the models as zombified inferi in couture. The line was cancelled after 3 shows. The Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Health and Regulation reviewed the potion in 2004 after an incident involving a wizard named Jasper Kettler, who used it during a Wizengamot hearing to appear emotionally neutral. His lawyer later revealed he was trying to avoid showing guilt under Veritaserum examination, using the potion as a psychological decoy. It failed miserably. Not only did Kettler seem guilty, he also bumped into 2 chairs, a goblet of water, and 1 irritated witness. "I thought he was already under a confundus charm," one elder wizard stated. Kettler was fined 500 galleons and banned from brewing any potion stronger than pepper-up for 5 years. While the potion is technically harmless if brewed correctly, its use is heavily discouraged. A misplaced drop of moon milk or overboiled ash fern can cause the effects to become permanent. There's a well-documented case of a young man from Ottery Catchpole, Benjamin Twigg, who attempted to create his own variation using dried boomslang skin. The result left him not only glassy-eyed, but blind for 4 days. "Everything looked like a foggy mirror," he said in a statement to Witch Weekly. "I kept walking into furniture. My owl didn't recognize me." The only remotely practical use for the Glassy gaze draft appears to be in the training of magical creatures. A Newt-level care of magical creatures textbook, Beasts and Boundaries, references a case where a handler used the potion to avoid making direct eye contact with a lethifold who is said to react violently to perceived human emotion. Whether this tactic is effective or merely coincidental remains a point of debate. Hagrid once scoffed at the idea during a lecture, muttering that if you need your eyes glazed over to face a lethifold, you best not be facing one at all. What's truly baffling is that the potion still exists in the official records of Hogwarts potion syllabus, noted with an asterisk, and the footnote for theoretical study only. Professor Slughorn used to joke during lectures that the potion was better suited for scaring portraits than people. He demonstrated its effects once using a bewitched dummy, which he doused with a drop of the draft. The resulting lifeless stare caused one Slytherin student to faint and another to mutter, "Looks like my mother during Christmas dinner." Even among potion masters, few have admitted to brewing it more than once. Zygmunt Thistlewhip, a potioneer known for his work on emotional infusion elixirs, tried to repurpose the draft in 1983 by combining it with powdered unicorn bone. The goal was to create a tranquility serum for use in meditation. Instead, his test subject reported a sensation of watching themselves from outside their own body, a disturbing dissociation that lasted nearly a week. The ministry classified the resulting potion as mentally destabilizing, and Thistlewhip abandoned the project. Perhaps the most tragic tale associated with the Glassy Gaze draft is that of Myrtle Crouch, a former Ravenclaw student who believed the potion would help her blend into the background at Hogwarts. Anxious and overwhelmed, she drank it daily for nearly a month. The effects, though never lethal, made her appear perpetually lost in thought. Her peers began calling her the mannequin ghost long before she died. Ironically, when she became an actual ghost, her eyes regained their clarity. The potion had succeeded in making her feel invisible, but at a cost she never anticipated. The magical community has long since agreed that if one's goal is to appear threatening, distant, or unreadable, spells like Illusio Oculus serve the purpose far more effectively. A quick flick of the wand and one's eyes can turn to liquid silver, flickering flame, or even reflect nothing at all. The potion, in contrast, requires an hour of brewing, precise temperature control, and a dash of powdered sleep bark, an ingredient banned in some countries for its narcotic effect on measles. All this for an illusion that even the cheapest charmed spectacles can replicate. Despite its uselessness, collectors of magical oddities have shown mild interest. Borgin and Burke's once sold a vintage vial allegedly brewed by Merton Bletchley himself. The price was 800 galleons, not because of its effects, but for the bottle's hand-etched stopper. The elixir inside had long since evaporated, but the glassy residue shimmered faintly under candlelight, as though the emptiness of the gaze had embedded itself into the glass. Still the potion persists in whispers. Some underground clubs in Nocturne Alley use it for emotional purging ceremonies, believing that to see oneself without feeling is to know one's true core. Participants drink the draught and spend hours staring into bewitched mirrors, their expressions devoid of fear or joy. The practice has been criticized by both the Magical Psychological Guild and the Society for the Ethical Use of Potions. Anecdotes abound of unfortunate uses. A failed marriage proposal at Madame Puddifoot's when a wizard took the potion thinking it would make his eyes mysteriously deep. His would-be fiancée ran out, screaming, thinking he had been possessed. A failed attempt at a dramatic stage play in Diagon Alley titled Gaze of the Abyss, where the entire cast drank the potion before curtain rise. No one could tell if they were acting. The show closed before intermission. In all recorded history, not a single documented use of the potion has resulted in praise or success. Even Peeves once mocked a student who drank it. Glassy eyes and jelly knees, you look like death caught a sneeze. According to Hogwarts legend, the potion is now used mostly by pranksters who slip it into drinks at parties. The results are rarely amusing, and most who fall victim spend the night wandering aimlessly, bumping into tables and lamps. Madame Pomfrey once warned, "The eyes are the windows to the soul. If you glaze over the glass, don't be surprised when no one sees you anymore." The quote has since been etched on a plaque outside the Hogwarts hospital wing. It serves as both a poetic warning and a reminder that even the most harmless-seeming magic can distance a person from themselves. The Glassy Gaze draft remains a curiosity, useless, unhelpful, and occasionally hazardous. It stands as a testament to the failures of magical innovation and the strange lengths to which witches and wizards will go for the illusion of mystery. A potion with no purpose, born from a desire to be unreadable, ultimately renders the drinker invisible not just to others, but to themselves. Number 19, Slow Wink Elixir. Of all the concoctions brewed in the dungeons of Hogwarts and beyond, there exists a singular potion that baffles even the most lenient of minds with its sheer impracticality. The potion of delayed blinking. Thick, translucent with an odd shimmer that shifts in and out of focus, the liquid sits stubbornly in its bottle as if hesitant to be consumed. It is not poisonous, nor dangerous, nor particularly unpleasant in taste, though those who have dared sip it describe a slightly oily sensation and the strange aftertaste of pickled mint. But its true oddity lies in its result. Once swallowed, the consumer loses the natural rhythm of their eyelids. Every blink slows to a surreal pace, taking nearly 5 seconds to complete, and every wink seems exaggerated and suspicious. Normal facial expressions become near impossible. Its first recorded usage at Hogwarts is well documented, albeit buried under the more dignified logs of useful inventions like the Wolfsbane potion or Felix Felicis. It was the spring of 1996, shortly after the Christmas break, when a lesser-known Ravenclaw named Elliot Wimple decided to impress Lavender Brown. A girl of fiery passions and a taste for dramatic gestures, Lavender was notoriously fickle in her attentions, having recently concluded her brief but intense romance with Ron Weasley. Wimple, emboldened by a mixture of Amortentia fumes and poor advice from a fifth-year Hufflepuff, believed that a slow, meaningful wink might spark romantic intrigue. Elliot's logic was unorthodox, to say the least. According to one of his classmates, Jeremy Phelps, he said that winking slowly made you seem confident, like you had all the time in the world. Elliot consumed a single vial of the potion right before a Care of Magical Creatures class. Lavender was standing by the hippogriff enclosure, brushing her hair out of her face when Elliot approached. He attempted a slow wink, the kind that might, under other circumstances, be read as mysterious or flirtatious. Instead, it looked as though he was suffering from an ocular seizure. His eye drooped, shuttered halfway, then hung in place like a broken curtain. Lavender frowned, recoiled, and instinctively delivered a sharp slap to the side of his head, believing he was mocking her. Madame Pomfrey, after checking for signs of hexing or nervous tics, discovered the effects of the potion and was none too pleased. The potion of delayed blinking was formally entered into the Hogwarts Registry of non-essential alchemical results, categorized under whimsical or disruptive use only. Professor Slughorn, when questioned about its origin, admitted that it might have been a discarded student experiment from the 1920s, originally titled Eyelid Temporal Displacement Tincture. He recalled vaguely that it was once tested during a Slug Club performance of the tragedy of Sir Cadogan, where the actor playing the ghost was supposed to blink hauntingly slowly. The result was laughter, not fear. The potion's alchemical formula is not particularly complex, a combination of chamomile extract, essence of tortoiseshell powdered moonstone, and 3 blinks of a demi-guise collected under moonlight. Not stirred, but allowed to settle into a natural rhythm over 6 hours. The difficulty lies not in making it, but in justifying its existence. The Department of Experimental Potions at the Ministry of Magic once published a pamphlet entitled Useless but Harmless, a registry of unwise brews, where the potion of delayed blinking received an entire page, decorated with a caricature of a wizard mid-blink and the caption, "He's not seducing you, he's just cursed himself." Attempts to weaponize the potion have failed miserably. Aura trainee Karen Wimplethatch once volunteered to test it during a dueling seminar. Her slowed blinking was supposed to unnerve her opponent, who might misread her facial expressions. Instead, she was immediately disarmed, having lost peripheral vision every time she tried to focus. She later reported, "It's like having 2 molasses-soaked curtains hanging over your face. Terribly unhelpful when someone's firing a stinging hex at your head." What makes this potion fascinating, however, is not its uselessness, but its persistence. It continues to appear in obscure potion books, always accompanied by a curious footnote or personal anecdote. In one copy of Advanced Alchemical Anomalies, a former editor scribbled in the margins, "Tried this on a dare. Nearly fell down the stairs after blinking at the staircase and losing depth perception. 210 would not recommend." It's as though wizards, ever drawn to the absurd, cannot quite let it go. Even Fred and George Weasley once considered bottling a variant for their joke shop. A product test called Winks and Nudges was briefly explored, the idea being a line of prank potions that altered expressions to match flirtatious behavior. But according to George, it was just too weird. No one wants to look like they're constantly winking at their gran. The prototype was shelved and eventually exploded in the back room, soaking an entire rack of skiving snack boxes in the process. An even more tragic misuse occurred at the wedding of Florence Peachtree, a minor figure in the magical drama guild who believed the potion would lend gravitas to her tearful vows. "I wanted each blink to be like a slow goodbye," she later confessed. But when the officiating wizard paused for a ceremonial moment of silence, Florence attempted a blink and couldn't complete it in time, leaving her in a half-crying, half-smirking expression that unnerved guests for the remainder of the ceremony. The Daily Prophet covered it with the headline, "Slow Blinks, Fast Regrets." In the St. Mungo's Department of Magical Maladies and Injuries, the potion is listed under mild neuromuscular confusions. It's not a danger to public safety, but a known cause of interpersonal discomfort. Healer Grosvenor Twill once remarked, "It's one of those potions that makes you wish for polyjuice-induced boils. At least those don't cause psychological unease in everyone around you." Twill had treated a young man who used it before his first Wizengamot internship interview. The young man blinked too slowly at the head undersecretary and was immediately dismissed on suspicion of sarcasm. Its social impact, though minor, cannot be ignored. In certain fringe wizarding art circles, the slow blink has become a symbol of disconnection, of the broken link between intention and expression. One Piece, Man with, one thought per minute, featured a charmed portrait that blinked once every 30 seconds, drawing spectators into a state of meditative discomfort. "It's about the isolation of the magical condition," the artist explained, though critics simply found it unsettling in a way we can't articulate. There was a brief moment when a group of fourth years at Beauxbatons attempted to reclaim the potion for theatrical effect, brewing it in secret and using it during their rendition of The Ghost of Helga Hufflepuff. One actress playing the titular ghost reportedly used the potion to blink as if from the other side of time, as one reviewer noted. But even in this avant-garde context, the potion proved too alienating. Audience members were more confused than moved. The production closed in 2 nights. In all its appearances, one pattern remains. The potion invites confusion, not just in the onlooker but in the drinker, who quickly realizes that something as small as a blink carries enormous social significance. Wizards, despite their spells and incantations, remain deeply vulnerable to misread glances, unintended signals, and uncomfortable silences, and this potion exploits that vulnerability to absurd levels. Curiously, Professor Trelawney once claimed that a student under the potion's effects had a heightened connection to the rhythms of the astral plane. According to her, when you blink slowly, you glimpse the world between worlds. No other teacher supported this theory, though Binns, ever literal, suggested that slower blinking might lead to longer REM cycles. But only if the drinker naps immediately, he added before drifting through the nearest wall. In a footnote of rare brews and when not to use them, author Bramble Twickett warns, "If you value social cohesion, avoid this potion. There are few things more alienating than delayed facial gestures. The uncanny valley is a real place, and this potion builds a summer home there." Twickett's own apprentice once drank the potion by accident and was later mistaken for a statue at a museum opening. There is, of course, a certain charm to such potions. They serve as reminders that not all magic is grand or necessary. Some of it is strange, laughable, and deeply human in its flaws. The potion of delayed blinking may never change the world, or save a life, or win a duel, but it might provoke a laugh, a shiver, or an awkward memory. And in the world of wizardry, even that has a place. Number 20, Predictability Draft. Of all the peculiar concoctions brewed in the quiet corners of the Hogwarts dungeons, few provoke more uncomfortable laughter and reluctant memories than the soft pink fluid officially known as the elixir of predictability. Its use is rare, its effects unsettling, and its place in the canon of magical potions occupies a strange limbo between harmless prank and magical sedation. It was first brewed, rather accidentally, by a Ravenclaw 7th year named Silas Twembley in 1864, who mistook powdered unicorn hooves for ground lacewing flies. The results, to his horror and the amusement of his peers, turned him into the most tediously agreeable person in the history of the Hogwarts library. He spent 3 full days agreeing with Madame Pince about the need for stricter whispering policies. The effects of the potion are not inherently harmful. It neither poisons nor incapacitates the drinker in the traditional sense. However, it strips the mind of its spontaneity and reduces the subject to a mirror of expectation. The drinker ceases to surprise, to resist, to question. Their laughter becomes a recycled chuckle, their speech a looping set of predictable cliches. Professor Horace Slughorn once described it, rather disdainfully, as what you'd get if a boggart brewed tea with a dictionary of platitudes. In one infamous instance, the elixir was administered during the 1991 academic year to an unruly Gryffindor boy named Malcolm Baddock, who had become something of a legend for replacing classroom chalk with fire whiskey-soaked sticks. Professor McGonagall, after 3 stern warnings and 1 exploded desk, allowed a few drops of the potion to be mixed into his pumpkin juice during breakfast. The change was immediate. Malcolm, once a vibrant hurricane of rebellion, responded to a reprimand that morning with, "Yes, ma'am, I quite understand. Rules are rules." He continued like that for 4 days, answering questions with phrases like, "That makes sense," and "I completely agree," until even Peeves, who attempted to pelt him with stale donuts, gave up out of sheer boredom. The side effects of the potion are not dangerous in the traditional sense, but their emotional toll can be significant. Students who consume the elixir for more than a few hours often experience a sense of detachment afterward, as if they'd been watching themselves from the outside, unable to intervene. Luna Lovegood once wrote in The Quibbler about her accidental exposure to the potion during a potion club demonstration. She described the experience as like being an obedient shadow with no sunlight to chase, and cautioned readers never to trade uniqueness for peace. It was Professor Snape who, in the early 1980s, formally banned the use of the potion in disciplinary settings, referring to it in staff records as a dangerous sedative for the soul. Though he despised troublemakers in his classroom, he made it clear that magical conformity was not an acceptable form of control. "Better a student who shouts," he reportedly told Dumbledore, "than one who whispers exactly what you want to hear." Curiously, the potion's only sanctioned use in recent decades has been within the Department of Mysteries, where unspeakables experiment with consciousness and free will. According to a 2007 leak in Witch Weekly, the elixir of predictability was used during a study on prophetic resistance. The researchers discovered that when the potion was given to trained seers, their visions ceased entirely. The theory was that the mind, so wrapped in the expected, could no longer glimpse the unexpected. The irony was not lost on the magical community, a potion that stifled prophecy by making the drinker too predictable for fate to care. It's also worth noting that some families have, disturbingly, kept the potion in private use. In a case that shocked the Wizengamot in 1988, a pure-blood patriarch from the Avery line was found to have been slipping the elixir into the tea of his rebellious daughter for months, attempting to make her more marriageable by silencing her political opinions. The trial was swift. The girl, freed from the potion's grip, testified in what would later become one of the most powerful courtroom speeches in Wizarding Britain. "You cannot love the version of me that merely reflects your desires," she declared. "That's not a daughter, that's a puppet with your face behind it." Even within Hogwarts, the potion has become something of an urban legend. First years whisper about it during stormy nights, wondering if Filch uses it on misbehaving cats or if the Bloody Baron drank some and never recovered. Of course, the latter is nonsense, but the former. There is a curious calm in Mrs. Norris's eyes when she patrols after curfew that no one can quite explain. Professor Sprout once attempted to use the elixir on a particularly defiant batch of mandrakes who refused to repot themselves. The experiment was disastrous. The mandrakes, under the influence of the potion, became so docile they lay motionless in their pots for weeks, whispering things like, "Whatever you say," and "repotting is the natural order." It was only when the potion wore off and the mandrakes collectively screamed in frustration that Professor Sprout swore never to meddle with their autonomy again. Fred and George Weasley, upon discovering the formula in the restricted section, attempted to weaponize it as a joke product called Polite Potion during their 5th year. However, their test subject, a Hufflepuff boy named Darian Quick, ended up sitting in the library for 2 days straight, nodding politely at every question and muttering, "That's an interesting point of view," regardless of what was said to him. The Weasley twins were so horrified by the results that they destroyed the entire batch and replaced it with a line of talking dung bombs. Arguably, the most disturbing use of the potion occurred in the aftermath of the Second Wizarding War. Some surviving Death Eaters, desperate to feign rehabilitation, were discovered to have dosed themselves with the elixir before Ministry interviews. The Ministry, thinking them completely reformed, fast-tracked their pardons. It wasn't until Kingsley Shacklebolt introduced random soul check spells during vetting that the truth was uncovered. A Daily Prophet headline from 1999 read, "Smiles, Nods and Lies, How the Elixir Fooled the Ministry." Perhaps the potion's most curious property is that it cannot be counteracted by typical antidotes. While it wears off naturally within 48 hours, during that time, the user cannot be persuaded, coerced, or magically commanded to behave differently, because they are already doing precisely what is expected of them. The mind does not resist. It folds inward, echoing the world like a broken phonograph. Hermione Granger once commented during a potion symposium in 2005, "It's not mind control, it's worse. It's mind compliance." There was once an attempt to use the potion in a diplomatic setting. During the 1985 Goblin-Wizard negotiations, one of the human mediators was given a drop of the potion in the hopes that he would become more agreeable. While he did indeed stop arguing, he also stopped offering any ideas at all. When the Goblin chieftain Thruck of the Ironclaws asked for territorial rights to Diagon Alley, the mediator responded with, "I see your point. That's perfectly reasonable." The talks collapsed within the hour. The potion's texture is almost offensively innocent, smooth, candy-scented, and lightly effervescent. It emits a faint, pink glow that pulses like a heartbeat. Inexperienced potion makers often mistake it for a calming draught or a child's elixir. But as many have discovered, what begins as a sip of sweet compliance quickly dissolves into days of emotional greyness. Argus Filch, though never proven, is believed by many students to have once been exposed to the potion. His repetitive growls, methodical routines, and complete lack of surprise at anything, even fireworks exploding in the Great Hall, have fueled the rumour that a student, perhaps in jest, dosed him in the 1970s. Dumbledore once wrote in a footnote to a staff memo, "Let us never forget that silence too can be conjured." Some argue that the potion has philosophical value. The Department of Magical Ethics published a controversial paper in 2003 titled "On the Value of Disagreement: Why Predictability is a Curse." The study included testimonies from former drinkers, one of whom wrote, "You think you want peace, but if peace costs you your curiosity, your laughter, your spark, then what you've got is a cage with velvet bars." During one of the last uses at Hogwarts, a Slytherin girl named Rosalie Greaves consumed the potion by mistake, having swapped bottles with her friend before a dueling club match. She walked onto the platform, bowed predictably, cast a basic disarming charm with clinical precision, and then refused to dodge her opponent's incoming spell. When asked later why she hadn't protected herself, she answered flatly, "He was supposed to win, so I let him." It was one of the eeriest testimonies in the school's history. There have been attempts to study the potion's core magic, to isolate what makes it so invasive to the human impulse. Some suspect it works not on the nerves but on the heart, suppressing the flickers of passion, the irrational sparks of surprise. The potion does not numb, it aligns. It drags the soul into straight lines and locks the doors of spontaneity. One researcher at St. Mungo's described it as the slow murder of mischief. Even in the world of magic, where things can be reversed, undone, reimagined, the elixir of predictability remains stubbornly final. There is no charm that can reignite curiosity once it's been extinguished by that pink fog. There is no potion to reverse its quiet theft. Those who drink it are not bewitched. They are surrendered, not controlled, but erased. And so it sits, largely unused on the dusty top shelves of potion vaults, labelled in faded ink, stored beside more dangerous and more glamorous brews. It waits not for admirers but for the curious, those foolish enough to believe that predictability is comfort, that agreement is safety, that peace is worth the price of personality. Most leave it untouched, some do not, and those who taste it once rarely ever wish to taste it again. Number 21. Anti-yawn elixir. Of all the obscure magical concoctions lurking in the shadows of Hogwarts' vast collection of potions, few are as tragically laughable as the so-called reversal yawn draught. Conceived with the most earnest of intentions, its effect is as absurd as its purpose, to prevent the drinker from yawning for several hours, regardless of exhaustion, boredom, or physical need. A true marvel of misguided magical innovation, the draught was originally brewed by a Ravenclaw 7th year named Wendell Twycross in the late 1800s, a time when potion-making was blooming with eccentric ambitions. Twycross, not to be confused with the later apparition instructor of the same name, envisioned a classroom free of the sluggish, mouth-stretching plague known as yawning. Specifically, he hoped to gain favour with Professor Binns, the ghostly history of magic teacher, who, even in life, was said to be deeply annoyed by inattentive pupils. Twycross's intentions, though noble by Hogwarts standards, overlooked one crucial fact. Yawning is not simply an act of boredom or disrespect, it is a biological imperative. It is the body's mechanism for oxygen regulation and alertness. To remove the symptom without curing the cause is to invite chaos beneath the surface. When Twycross first tested the potion on himself during a long lecture in the North Tower, he indeed found himself incapable of yawning, but as the minutes ticked by, he began to sweat. His jaw tensed, his eyes watered uncontrollably, his entire face twitched with the ferocity of a corked sneeze. By the end of the lesson, he had bitten through the corner of his tongue and had to be escorted to the hospital wing. Though this should have been a warning sign, the reversal yawn draught found its way into whispered popularity among first years and second years desperate to impress strict professors. It was said that drinking the draught before a long double period with Professor Binns would make a student appear attentive and respectful, especially when the old ghost floated in with his usual monotone murmur. But the reality was much more grim. While the physical yawn was suppressed, the urge remained, and without the release, it grew louder, more insistent, becoming a kind of internal screaming. Faces twisted into frozen grimaces, students developed migraines, jaw pain, and in one alarming case involving a Slytherin boy named Ephraim Mulciber, temporary lockjaw that required Madame Pomfrey's intervention. Professor Binns himself was entirely oblivious to this unintended plague. Being a ghost, he rarely noticed anything beyond the yellowed notes he had been reciting for decades. It was precisely this detachment that inspired students to try anything that might disguise their boredom as engagement. He drifted back into the blackboard, Ron once whispered to Harry during one such lecture, and kept on talking about the International Warlock Convention of 1289. Harry didn't hear much of that lesson either, as his attention had wandered, no potion needed. But the idea of silencing one's body's reactions entirely, that was something only the most desperate students would consider. The true absurdity of the reversal yawn draught lies in its paradox. It forces the user into an illusion of attentiveness while creating visible and painful distractions that defeat the potion's purpose. Consider the case of Felicity Bode, a Hufflepuff prefect in the 1970s who attempted to use the potion before her NEWT level History of Magic exam. She was a model student, dedicated, composed, and utterly determined not to show a moment of fatigue during the grueling 3-hour written test. She drank the potion 15 minutes before sitting down at her desk. Halfway through, her nostrils flared, her shoulders shook, and her parchment became stained with teardrops, not from emotion, but from the relentless battle of her body begging for a yawn she could not give. By the end of the exam, her answers were incoherent scribbles. The ministry official proctoring the test noted that Miss Bode appeared to be undergoing some manner of private breakdown, yet was disturbingly silent throughout. Unlike stimulants such as pepper-up potion or invigoration draft, which work with the body's needs to energize and revitalize, the reversal yawn draft simply erects a wall against the inevitable. And unlike the draft of peace, which soothes anxiety without completely erasing natural emotion, this brew is cruel in its singular defiance of nature. It makes no attempt to help the drinker feel less tired. It simply robs them of the ability to exhibit it. Even among potioneers, it is regarded with a mixture of embarrassment and bewilderment. Professor Slughorn, in his return to Hogwarts during Harry's 6th year, was once asked by a curious Ravenclaw whether the draft had any practical application in potion tournaments. Slughorn reportedly laughed, saying, "If your aim is to terrify the judges with a look of tortured constipation, then yes, it's a splendid choice." The potion's recipe is deceptively simple, involving crushed sycamore bark, essence of shrivel fig, powdered hippogriff claw, and a hint of saprophoros bean. Ironic, considering that the bean is usually employed in sleeping draughts. The inclusion of that last ingredient has led some scholars to believe that the reversal yawn draught may have started as a failed experiment in waking potions. According to potion historian Daria Moonfleet, it is entirely possible that the draught began its life as an alertness enhancer. That it failed so spectacularly and yet continued to be used speaks volumes about the student mindset at Hogwarts. And yet, despite the discomfort and even ridicule associated with it, the potion continues to reappear in Hogwarts lore. In the 1980s, the Weasley twins allegedly sold vials of the stuff as a prank item under the label Bin's Bane. Fred described it in his joke catalogue as perfect for making your enemies look like they're holding in a sneeze during a funeral. There were rumours that even Percy Weasley, in a moment of misguided academic enthusiasm, once tried it during a late-night study session. The next morning, he refused to open his mouth until after breakfast. The true tragedy of the reversal yawn draught isn't just its ineffectiveness, but the message it sends. It suggests that appearance is more important than truth, that looking awake matters more than actually being alert. It's a symptom of a larger culture in the wizarding world where performance sometimes eclipses substance. Students hoped that by using the potion they could appear diligent, but the ones who succeeded in Professor Binns's class were never those who looked the part. They were those who engaged with the material despite its dryness. Hermione Granger, for example, never once considered using such a potion. She yawned openly when necessary, but always returned to her note-taking with an intensity that even Binns occasionally noticed. "Miss Granger," he once murmured, "is the only pupil to have asked about the Goblin rebellions of 1612 in detail since 1875. Her secret wasn't in silencing her body's responses, but in channeling her mind to conquer the monotony. There's also something quietly sinister about denying the body a basic reflex. In suppressing the yawn, the reversal yawn draught places the drinker in a state of psychological tension. The feeling has been described as being on the verge of a sneeze for hours, or like laughing in church when one must not. The result is an exhausting emotional strain, a sort of self-inflicted magical claustrophobia. The face twitches, the teeth clench, the eyes twitch. In time, this tension spills over into real physiological responses, headaches, nausea, and even brief hallucinations in cases of extreme fatigue. Indeed, the Department of Magical Health and Regulation issued a brief advisory in 1998 suggesting that the potion be removed from student access entirely. Not dangerous, the report read, but profoundly unhelpful. Still, its production was never formally banned, simply because it was too unimportant to warrant legislation. Like a spell for turning hedgehogs into pincushions, it exists in that odd margin of magical experimentation that is neither useful nor entertaining, just there. Its persistence, however, is telling. It lingers in potion notebooks, on joke shop shelves, and in the whispered warnings passed down between older and younger students. "Don't drink that before transfiguration," one might hear in the common room. "You'll look like you're trying not to cry for an hour." One of the more recent documented uses was in 2014, during an informal student prank war between Gryffindor and Slytherin. A Gryffindor named Isla Thomas slipped a dose of the draught into the pumpkin juice of her Slytherin rival during breakfast before a defense against the dark arts oral exam. The result was memorable. The boy, a wiry prefect named Mordecai Flint, stood stiffly in front of the class, blinking and gulping, and emitting the strangest suppressed grunts as he attempted to recite wand movements. Professor Dawlish awarded him 0 points for composure. In that instance, the potion's only purpose was humiliation, and perhaps that is its true destiny, not as a serious tool for concentration, but as a novelty weapon of self-sabotage. Its very design ensures that the user cannot maintain dignity because it demands the impossible to defy a natural urge with no benefit in return. Even the simplest cheering charm offers more value. There is no spell that can truly replicate the reversal yawn draft's torment. The nearest comparison might be a poorly cast silencio on the throat, but even that offers a clearer purpose. The draft, on the other hand, offers neither performance enhancement nor health benefit. It offers a grotesque performance of composure that masks nothing. The face reveals all. Wendell Twycross himself eventually abandoned potion-making entirely and took up magical cartography. His name survives only in a footnote in a dusty volume of failed student brews stored somewhere in the restricted section. But the draft he created continues to echo through the corridors of Hogwarts, a testament to the folly of trying to cheat the body's instincts without understanding them. In the end, there is something poetic about the potion's futility. It does nothing but stop the yawn, and in doing so reveals everything else that lies beneath the surface: the discomfort, the tension, the failure to rest, the fear of being seen as disengaged. It is a potion made from pressure, consumed by those who feel they cannot afford even the smallest moment of visible fatigue. Would you drink such a potion, knowing the price is not relief, but the silent scream of muscles straining to express what nature demands? Or would you, like Hermione, allow the yawn and then get back to learning? In the grand library of magical knowledge, some potions illuminate the future. Others, like the reversal yawn draft, only illuminate our mistakes. Number 22, Fluorescent Elixir. The fluorescent elixir was never meant to be taken seriously. Nestled between the exploding bonbons and belching cauldrons, in the chaotic shelves of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, it stood like a glittering joke, a vial of sparkling syrup with a label that read, in curling, mischievous font, "Light up your life," literally. It was, by all appearances, another magical novelty item among the endless array of absurdities Fred and George Weasley proudly sold. And yet beneath the humour and glowing reviews from giggling students lay a concoction that embodied the very definition of useless brilliance. Upon ingestion, the fluorescent elixir transformed the drinker's skin into a softly glowing lantern. The hue, as multiple testimonials claimed, varied from neon green to bubblegum pink, though the label hinted that mood might influence the shade, an unverified theory, but widely believed by those who'd experimented with it during sleepless Gryffindor nights. Lee Jordan once recounted in The Quibbler how he glowed a furious crimson after losing a bet to Angelina Johnson, which led many to speculate the potion tapped into one's emotional state. The science behind it, however, remained murky. If it could be called science at all, its debut was subtle. In the back corner of the shop, Fred had placed it beside a sign that read, "For when you want to be seen, really, really seen." For most, the idea was hilarious. For some, dangerous. The first Hogwarts student to try it inside the castle walls was reportedly Dennis Creevey, known more for his boundless enthusiasm than his wisdom. He drank it after hours, just before curfew, hoping to startle the fat friar in the Hufflepuff corridor. What followed was less ghostly spook and more catastrophic alarm. His glowing form, radiant in soft lime green, alerted Argus Filch immediately, who mistook it for a Peeves prank gone wrong. The punishment was severe, but the legend was born. Years later, the elixir became a staple at wizarding New Year's parties. Wizards in Diagon Alley could be seen shimmering like enchanted fireflies as the clock struck midnight. Madame Rosmerta even stocked a few bottles one year, selling them in special Valentine-themed packaging with pink labels and heart-shaped vials. Perfect for those who want to shine on their date? she claimed. And shine they did, some so brightly that it disrupted the ambience of the three broomsticks, forcing her to ban the potion indoors the following season. But despite its growing popularity as a party gimmick, the elixir carried a significant flaw: its sheer impracticality. The effect lasted for hours. It couldn't be dimmed, reversed, or hidden beneath robes. Glamour charms had little impact. One unfortunate Ravenclaw, Lysander Bletchley, learned this the hard way. He drank it before sneaking into the restricted section, thinking he could finish a late-night essay on magical fungi. Instead, his softly radiant silhouette gave Madame Pince a clear target for a well-aimed Petrificus totalis. The next morning, he was found still frozen between the shelves, glowing blue, with his essay untouched. It wasn't just Hogwarts students who fell victim to its poorly timed effects. An article in the Daily Prophet humorously chronicled the tale of a ministry intern, Greta Voss, who accidentally consumed the elixir, mistaking it for her vitamin tonic. She glowed magenta during an important Wizengamot session, sitting behind Kingsley Shacklebolt. The former aura tried to continue undisturbed, but the distraction was too great. "We are not here to discuss pigmentation," he reportedly muttered. Greta was transferred to a department with less visibility, specifically magical drainage regulation. While entertaining, these stories underscored the potion's central flaw. It had no real purpose outside amusement. Unlike Polyjuice Potion or Felix Felicis, which served high-stakes functions in the wizarding world, the fluorescent elixir lacked urgency, necessity, or even mischief of strategic value. Its glow was unshakable, relentless. As George Weasley himself once said in jest, "You might as well carry a lantern and a loudspeaker." For someone fleeing Filch, dodging snatchers, or hiding from a werewolf, the potion was a death sentence wrapped in glitter. Still, some tried to argue for its utility. A few auras debated using it during search missions at night, theorizing it could help keep track of team members in dark terrain. However, this idea was swiftly abandoned after a field test in the Forbidden Forest ended in disaster. The glowing aura was mistaken for a magical creature and targeted by centaurs. The report, heavily redacted, simply noted, "Do not combine light magic with unknown forest environments." The elixir was never brought on patrol again. Interestingly, the elixir resisted all known methods of concealment. Invisibility cloaks proved futile. The glow leaked through the fabric like moonlight through lace. This made the potion uniquely problematic for Hogwarts pranksters. James Sirius Potter reportedly attempted to use the elixir during a late-night raid on the Slytherin common room, assuming the cloak would shield him. Instead, his radiant outline beneath the cloak gave away his location instantly, and he ended up hexed, hung from a chandelier, and immortalized in a dozen enchanted portraits before McGonagall intervened. In another documented misuse, a group of Beauxbaton students consumed the elixir during the Triwizard Tournament's after-party, hoping to outshine their Durmstrang rivals, literally. They succeeded. Unfortunately, their vibrant glow disrupted the charm illusion fireworks, causing several explosions to misfire and turning the event into chaos. Fleur Delacour, now headmistress, reportedly banned the elixir from campus under threat of permanent expulsion. "We sparkle with elegance, not lunacy," she was quoted as saying. Beyond the mishaps, there remained a quiet fascination with the elixir's recipe. No formal records existed in the Moste Potente Potions compendium, nor in any volumes by Zygmunt Budge. Rumour held that Fred and George developed it by accident while trying to create a nightlight charm that could be ingested. What emerged was a potion that offered no light to the room, but all the light to the skin. It had no known antidote, and once taken, the glow could only fade naturally, usually within 6 to 8 hours. Some joked that the only cure was time and embarrassment. A curious entry in one of Luna Lovegood's old journals, discovered decades later, hinted that the potion might have roots in ancient druidic rituals. "Glowing skin was once considered a sign of fey blessing," she wrote. "To shine in the dark was to show the world you were touched by unseen spirits." While this theory was never confirmed, it added an odd, spiritual weight to an otherwise comedic creation. Whether the twins knew of this connection or simply stumbled into it remains unclear. The potion's notoriety didn't escape the notice of Muggle-born students either. Some described it as wizard rave juice, drawing comparisons to glow sticks and neon body paint. A pair of Muggle-born twins once hosted a Disco Dungeons event in the old Slytherin practice chamber, with enchanted mirrors echoing music charms and a supply of elixir that lit up half the corridor. When Professor Slughorn discovered the source of the commotion, he confiscated the remaining vials and allegedly drank one himself the following weekend. He was seen glowing faintly in the staff room, humming Celestina Warbeck. Despite its lack of utility, or perhaps because of it, the elixir endured. It represented a kind of joyful madness magic for magic's sake. In a world where potions often meant poison or power, the fluorescent elixir offered neither. It existed outside the logic of use, floating in a space between whimsy and chaos. It was a reminder that not all magic needed to be serious. Not all potions needed a purpose. Sometimes it was enough just to shine. Even the Hogwarts faculty couldn't avoid its charm. Professor Flitwick once used it during a school concert, giving each member of the frog choir a different hue. It was like watching a rainbow sing, one student recalled. The choir glowed through Odo the hero, and though the harmony was slightly off-key, the effect was so mesmerizing that no one seemed to care. The potions master at the time, a stern woman named Professor Castle, was less amused. She complained of being blinded by a lime green soprano and insisted the elixir be kept out of educational use. Years later, when the elixir was briefly banned from Zonko's joke shop under a new safety ordinance from the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, a protest was held by students from at least 4 houses. They paraded through Hogsmeade glowing in solidarity, chanting, "Let us shine." The ban was lifted within a month. The ministry quietly concluded the elixir was harmless, if absurd. In the official statement, one line stood out. Glowing skin does not constitute magical threat unless accompanied by hexes, curses, or aggressive choreography. Today, the potion remains on shelves, often overlooked in favor of skiving snack boxes or decoy detonators. And yet every so often a new student discovers it, drinks it, and learns what it truly means to be visible. There is no hiding with the elixir, no escaping attention. Whether in a crowd or alone on the astronomy tower, you are lit like a beacon, a human spell against darkness. It's a lesson in vulnerability, in spectacle, in magical absurdity. The elixir's legacy may not lie in usefulness, but in the stories it created, in the laughter that echoed through common rooms, in the mishaps that became legends. Remember when Seamus glowed yellow and claimed it was a sign of divine favor? One student asks. Or when Peeves drank it and sang glowing lullabies down the hall. The elixir lives in those tales, in the memory of moments too ridiculous to forget. And so, among the world's most powerful and practical potions, the fluorescent elixir glimmers like a joke that refuses to fade. It is, in every sense, an accident of brilliance, a beacon of foolishness in a world that often forgets how to laugh. To drink it is to become, if only for a few hours, impossible to ignore. And sometimes, in the quiet seriousness of wizarding life, that might be magic enough. Number 23, Accent Infusion. The tiny glass phial shimmered with a violet hue, tucked neatly between a laughing draught and a common pepper-up potion, on the dusty shelf of the Hogwarts storage cupboard. Few students reached for it, and even fewer professors saw fit to explain its purpose. The label read, Accentum acutum, the elixir of sharp accent. Its description was as whimsical as it was vague. For a foreign flair of tongue, results vary. Among Hogwarts students, it was something of a joke, a relic of some bygone curriculum no longer taught. Most potions had obvious uses: healing, transformation, enhancement. This one seemed to exist for the sole purpose of confusion. It was during a joint seminar between Hogwarts and Beauxbaton that the elixir of sharp accent finally saw use, though not in any meaningful way. A boy named Terence Muldoon from Ravenclaw, known for his anxious attempts to appear sophisticated, seized upon the elixir as his moment of brilliance. The Beauxbatons students had arrived trailing clouds of enchanted perfume and speaking in lilting French cadences. Terence, utterly smitten with a girl named Elodie Larocque, decided to impress her in the most ill-advised way possible. He drank the elixir just before the afternoon workshop began, and within seconds his voice warped into a caricature of a French accent, more Inspector Clouseau than Parisian elegance. His words slurred unnaturally, consonants swirled like soup, and vowels bent in improbable ways. Elodie stared at him, puzzled, then horrified, and finally amused. She whispered something in rapid French to her friend, who burst into laughter so loud it echoed off the dungeon walls. Terence, trying to save face, attempted to compliment her, but all that came out was a tangle of syllables that bore more resemblance to gobbledygook than French. The elixir did not merely overlay an accent onto the drinker's natural speech, it distorted speech entirely, making simple communication a laborious task. Words came out with alien rhythms, phrases twisted into mockeries of language. Some said it even borrowed fragments of obscure dialects long since faded from the Muggle world. For the next hour, Terence could barely be understood, and Professor Slughorn eventually excused him from the lesson for disrupting the flow of instruction. The question lingered in the air: why did this potion exist at all? In a world filled with glamours, polyjuice transformations, and voice-altering charms like Sonorous and Muffliato, what rational mind had seen the need to brew an elixir that rendered one barely intelligible? "It's a theatrical relic," Professor Slughorn once admitted when questioned by Hermione Granger, who was cataloguing rare potions in her 5th year. Once used by wizarding thespians to lend a bit of foreign flavour to their roles. But as you rightly point out, charms have replaced much of that nonsense. Indeed, the theatrical use was plausible, perhaps once in some Baroque corner of the wizarding world. Magical performances required a splash of foreign affectation, but even then, why not simply cast a charm? More than one professor privately speculated that the elixir of sharp accent had been the result of a failed attempt to develop a language learning potion. What had started as an effort to understand gobbledygook or murmish might have gone sideways, resulting instead in this awkward cocktail of phonetic confusion. Fred and George Weasley had once attempted to mass-produce the potion at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, marketing it under the name Continental Charmer. According to a customer complaint later published in the Daily Prophet, a wizard who had consumed the potion before a date ended up speaking with a bizarre hybrid of Scottish and Bulgarian, horrifying his dinner companion and frightening a waiter into dropping an entire treacle tart. The product was quickly pulled from the shelves. "Didn't add the desired je ne sais quoi," George later joked in an interview. One ancient manuscript, Le Codex des Potions Théâtrales, found in the restricted section, briefly references an early version of the elixir. It describes a court jester in 15th century Burgundy who used the potion to impersonate visiting dignitaries, but the humour apparently wore thin when he was unable to return to his natural voice for a week. "The curse of false tongues," the marginalia read in shaky ink. "Once taken, the truth hides behind the mask of mimicry." The potion had also surfaced during the Second Wizarding War under far stranger circumstances. A Death Eater named Wilfrid Grot claimed he had used the elixir during an infiltration mission at the Bulgarian Ministry of Magic. His testimony, recorded in Wizengamot transcripts, was filled with contradictions. While Polyjuice potion might have sufficed, Grot insisted the accent gave him an edge. "They believed I was one of them because I spoke like their grandmothers," he had boasted. He was arrested a day later, betrayed not by his voice but by his failure to understand a single word of Bulgarian legal jargon. Even in education, the elixir has been viewed as more of a disciplinary deterrent than a teaching tool. When students at Durmstrang Institute committed minor infractions, they were sometimes dosed with a version of the potion that mimicked an ancient Carpathian brogue. One former Durmstrang student recounted in the European Enchanter how he'd spent an entire week answering questions in a voice that sounded like a strangled accordion. The shame alone was enough to keep him from breaking curfew again. some experimental potion makers have tried tweaking the recipe to more productive ends. One promising attempt came from a Ukrainian alchemist named Daria Volkov, who claimed to have developed a version that allowed users to understand foreign tongues rather than just speak them poorly. However, after a test subject claimed to hear echoes of thoughts from strangers, the experiment was abandoned. Volkov's lab was closed down under the Department of Magical Hazards due to neurolinguistic contamination. In theory, such a potion could have applications in espionage or diplomacy, but again, the existence of much more elegant magical solutions renders the idea obsolete. Wizards and witches have long used transfiguration and voice charms to alter their speech with greater precision. The elixir of sharp accent remains less of a tool and more of an accident, like a painter trying to use a mop instead of a brush. The cultural implications of the potion have also been the subject of some academic scorn. Professor Bathilda Bagshot once wrote in an unpublished essay that the potion reduces rich linguistic traditions to a punchline. She feared it encouraged stereotype rather than understanding. To turn the beauty of Irish cadence or French nuance into a novelty undermines the magic inherent in real language, she wrote. The essay never made it into a history of magic, but circulated briefly among students interested in magical ethics. Yet there's an odd reverence for the elixir in certain niche communities. Magical comedians, especially those working the Wizarding Wireless Network comedy circuits, sometimes keep it on hand for skits and impersonations. One popular routine by a performer named Boris Blagden features him taking a sip and giving a weather forecast in increasingly absurd dialects, ending in parseltongue. Still, even in comedy, the potion's use is hit or miss. Audiences tire quickly of the same joke in different vowels. Interestingly, despite all its flaws, the potion has proven surprisingly resistant to tampering. Attempts to dilute it, refine its effects, or merge it with memory-enhancing drafts have all ended in failure. A team from the Institute of Advanced Alchemy in Oslo documented 22 failed trials. One subject reportedly began quoting Beadle the Bard in what sounded like Yiddish and passed out for 3 days. Even Hogwarts' own supply of the elixir is now rarely restocked. Madame Pomfrey reportedly requested its removal from the hospital wing entirely after a fourth-year student drank it on a dare and began speaking in a dialect so dense she suspected neurological damage. "We have potions for healing," she said curtly, "not for buffoonery." If anything, the elixir of sharp accent has become an accidental mirror of magical hubris, a creation with no clear purpose, clinging to a world that has long outgrown it. It represents what happens when potion-making veers into the whimsical without anchoring itself in utility. For every Felix Felicis there is a forgotten brew that lingers in cabinets, occasionally called upon for novelty, but never for necessity. Perhaps its continued existence is a kind of inside joke among potion masters, a quiet reminder that not all magic is meant to be meaningful. In a world where spells can open doors, mend bones, or illuminate dark corridors, perhaps there is room, albeit a very small, dusty one, for magic that serves no purpose beyond absurdity. And yet even absurdity has its place, for the boy who drank it to impress a girl, for the court jester who mimicked kings, and for the clown who made Parseltongue weather forecasts. Perhaps the elixir of sharp accent reminds us that not all magic needs a reason. Sometimes it just needs a laugh. Number 24, Ragdoll Potion. There exists in the vast archive of wizarding concoctions a potion so peculiarly unnecessary, so devoid of practical application, that even pranksters and potion masters raise their eyebrows at its continued inclusion in advanced brewing textbooks. This is the so-called ragwort potion, mockingly referred to by students at Hogwarts as the flop brew, or more colourfully, Muppet juice. Its effects are both theatrical and unpleasant. When ingested, the drinker loses all muscle tone. Limbs hang loose and lifeless, movements become sluggish and clumsy, and the unfortunate soul walks like a puppet with its strings abruptly severed. The body lolls and swings, giving the impression of someone recovering from a nightmarish jelly-legs curse, but worse and wholly encompassing. Described in Moste Potente Potions as an experimental draught devised in the interest of magical mimicry and movement study, the ragwort potion is the sort of spellwork that sounds fascinating to academics and utterly absurd to everyone else. First brewed in the 17th century by Berengar Gullyhorn, a reclusive potioneer from Dorset, who reportedly tried to create a potion that could mimic the effects of various curses without long-term damage, ragwort potion was one of his least successful ventures. The intent, he once scribbled in the margins of his journal, now housed in the restricted section of the British Museum of Magical Artifacts, was to create a potion that might allow the mimicry of magical conditions for observational research, particularly with St. Mungo's practitioners in mind. But whatever lofty ambitions Gullyhorn held were quickly overshadowed by the sheer pointlessness of the result. After a single dose was tested on himself, and a second regrettably offered to his Kneazle, who promptly fell off the kitchen counter and sulked for a week, he shelved the formula and turned instead to the more promising Enervation elixirs. What was left behind was an oddity, a potion that induced a temporary, humiliating state of flaccid clumsiness, lasting roughly 1 hour and accompanied by an overwhelming sense of fatigue, both physical and emotional. One of the rare documented uses of this potion occurred during the 1893 Hogwarts April Fool's pranking season. A seventh-year Slytherin named Idris Knott, infamous for his creative cruelty, slipped a dose into the pumpkin juice of a rival Gryffindor Quidditch chaser, Maura Diggory, just before practice. Within minutes, her broom slipped from beneath her as her grip vanished like mist. She tumbled 30 feet onto the pitch, barely managing to slow her descent with a sloppy hover charm. Her collapse was not only painful, but humiliating. Maura described the experience in a letter to her friend as like watching myself unravel at the seams, and I couldn't hold a teacup, let alone a broom. Idris was suspended for a month. Headmistress Euphemia Black, then in charge of Hogwarts, was reportedly furious enough to hex a gargoyle. She banned the use of the ragwort potion in any student capacity and forbade it from being kept in the student-accessible stores. "Such mischief is not clever," she wrote in a school-wide proclamation, "nor is it innocent, it is violence wrapped in laughter." And indeed, the potion's use as a prank tool proved short-lived, as even jokesters like Zonkos declined to carry it in their shelves. The effects were simply too unpleasant, the after-feeling too vile. Those who had tried it compared the aftermath to being wrung out like a dishcloth and hung over a line. The sensation left behind, according to a 1978 report by St. Mungo's interns experimenting with safe stress simulations, included prolonged emotional drainage and disorientation, a strange cognitive fog that left one unable to focus for hours. "This is nothing like a stun spell," one intern, Martina Jorkins, wrote. "It's not even like magical exhaustion. It's as if the very intent to move, thought itself, is dulled. There's no useful comparison in wizarding physiology. It's a waste of ingredients and a terror to experience." And yet, despite the potion's overwhelming uselessness, it continues to appear in obscure potion compendiums. One particularly controversial inclusion of the ragwort potion was in the revised Ars Alchimia compendium used briefly at Durmstrang Institute during the 1980s. The head of their potion department, Karl Drakovich, argued that it was essential for understanding the delicate balance of magical muscular control. His students disagreed. 3 students withdrew from the course after being subjected to the potion during an in-class demonstration. One of them, Iskra Markov, wrote bitterly in a letter to her cousin in Romania, "If this is what passes for learning, I'd rather be hexed." I left class feeling like I'd lost my soul through my fingertips. It's not just a matter of discomfort. It's the philosophical emptiness of the thing. What kind of brewer spends hours crafting a potion whose only result is to make someone useless for an hour? The ingredients are deceptively simple. Boiled bindweed, a droplet of troll fat powdered mooncalf sinew, and essence of flubberworm. None of these are rare, and yet the combination somehow produces something as bleak as it is bizarre. The potion is pale grey, thick, and smells vaguely like wet socks. When stirred counterclockwise 12 times, it begins to bubble lazily and emits a steam that causes mild nausea. That such a thing is ever completed to its final stage says more about the stubbornness of potion makers than the worth of the final product. There were whispers, always whispers, that the ragwort potion was not merely an academic curiosity, but a rejected candidate for military application during the First Wizarding War. This theory, though unsupported by records, stems from a brief mention in Alastair Moody's private notes, recovered posthumously. Odd brew, useless unless your enemy is daft enough to drink it. Saw Dolohov carrying a vial once, never used it. Probably forgot what it did. Dolohov, it seemed, had an interest in potions that mimicked paralysis, but lacked fatality. The ragwort potion might have been meant as a test, but even the Death Eaters found it too unpredictable and too slow for field use. If even the most unhinged dark wizards find your potion ineffective, that's a damning review. And then there is the matter of consent. To give someone this potion knowingly is, in essence, to rob them of their agency. Unlike a hex or jinx, which often comes with some duel, some struggle, some action, this is a quiet and cowardly violation. And unlike the draught of living death or even the lesser sleeping potion, the ragwort leaves the mind awake and aware of the fact that the body cannot follow its commands, that every twitch is delayed, every breath laborious. As such, it becomes a small-scale nightmare, a dissociation not born of pain, but of helplessness. It's a favourite of no one. Even Fred and George Weasley, known to dabble in outrageous brews at their shop Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, declared during an interview with the Daily Prophet, "We tried it once, just once. George fell face-first into a display of exploding bonbons, and we both agreed there are better ways to humiliate yourself." The potion has not appeared in any of their products or joke assortment since, and for good reason. The effect is too real, too lasting, too utterly devoid of joy. The only modern academic to take a serious look at the potion is Professor Eglantine Caro, a potioneer at Castellobruxo, who wrote a scathing critique in the Journal of Magical Pharmacology. "The ragwort potion," she wrote, "is the culinary equivalent of overboiled cabbage with a hint of despair. It has no place in modern healing, hex-breaking, or even comedy. Its existence persists only because wizarding tradition is loath to discard even the most obvious of mistakes." A handful of eccentrics still claim the potion has niche use in performance art. One such example came during a magical theatre production in Paris, Les Marionnettes de la Lune, where the actors, under controlled supervision, drank ragwort potion on stage to convincingly portray cursed villagers. The audience, while impressed by the realism, largely reported that the performance was hard to watch, deeply unsettling, and more like a hospital play than a magical tragedy. Even in research environments, its role has diminished. St. Mungo's long ago stopped using it for training, noting the emotional toll it placed on volunteers. We found that even simulated disability, when done through magical sedation like the ragwort effect, caused lingering psychological unease, reported healer Padma Summerby in a 1995 ethics review. It is not enough to be safe, we must also be kind. In the annals of wizarding oddities, the ragwort potion rests somewhere between the ever-combusting pudding and the spell of backward sneezing, a relic of an age when experimentation outran practicality. Its continued mention in textbooks is perhaps less about value and more about caution, a reminder that just because something can be brewed doesn't mean it should be. No student truly masters the ragwort potion. They endure it. The few brave or foolish enough to attempt it during their NEWT level studies report an unshakable sense of violation and nausea. "It was like turning my body into string," wrote Ellis Kirk, a Ravenclaw who brewed it for his 7th-year research. "No triumph in success, only dread. I never want to see that potion again." And perhaps that's the real reason it remains in the margins of potion history. As a warning, as a mistake-given form, as the magical embodiment of futility, it is the wizarding world's version of a cautionary tale, reminding every brewer, every curious student, that just because magic can bend the laws of nature does not mean It must do so without reason, compassion, or sense. There are potions that heal, that reveal, that transform and protect. And then there is ragwort, a limp, lifeless whisper of a thing, serving no greater good, no higher thrill, no joyful mischief, just a sad hour of marionette movements and aching regret. It is, in the end, not just a useless potion, but an uncomfortable truth that even magic, at its worst, can be pointlessly cruel. Number 25. Flavor Reversal Draft. The cauldron simmered with a hue that defied appetite, a muddled beige that suggested nothing of culinary delight and everything of magical interference. Known in obscure corners of the library as the Taste Reverser Potion, this strange concoction was never taught in standard Hogwarts curriculum, and with good reason. It offered no healing benefits, no offensive capabilities in a duel, and no ability to charm, disarm, or protect. Its singular function was to invert the essence of flavor itself, to take the world of taste and cruelly turn it inside out. Sweet became bitter, bitter turned cloying. Tart things were rendered syrupy, spicy dishes dulled into bland pulp. And perhaps most damning of all, it contaminated water. Even the simplest sip became unbearable. The potion's creator remains a matter of speculation, though some suspect Professor Vindictus Viridian, known for dabbling in morally ambiguous magical experiments, might have penned early versions in his unpublished manuscript Gastronomic Hexes and Hexed Gastronomy. Others blame an eccentric potioneer named Amadeus Bitterbloom, expelled from Durmstrang in 1852, for feeding it to an entire faculty dinner. What is known, however, is that the potion was never meant to be malicious, at least not in theory. It was designed, rather absurdly, as a training tool for palate expansion, allowing young witches and wizards to confront their aversions and learn to appreciate the beauty in contrast. The idea was that by altering the taste of food, one could mentally overcome preference and bias, opening the mind to culinary exploration. But in practice, it merely inspired fury and hunger. Few examples illustrate its failure as poignantly as the catastrophe that befell a fifth-year Hufflepuff named Cecily Marchant. Cecily, ever curious and eager to prove herself in Professor Slughorn's Advanced Potions Club, decided to test the Taste Reverser on the morning of the autumn feast. "I wanted to see if I could overcome my hatred of Brussels sprouts," she later explained in a bitter letter to the Hogwarts Cauldron, the school's semi-official student newsletter. What transpired was a 6-hour ordeal of culinary horror. The pumpkin juice turned to something like burned ink. The candied yams bit like alum powder. Even the treacle tart, Harry Potter's favourite dessert, tasted like mouldy cabbage. Cecily was found in the corridor outside the Great Hall, clutching her stomach and wailing that she would never trust taste again. There was a cruel irony to the potion's timing. At Hogwarts, food is not merely sustenance, it is celebration, comfort, tradition. The enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall reflects the mood of the feast. The dishes are crafted with magic so precise that each portion is hot, fresh, and exquisitely seasoned. From the shepherd's pies to the warm puddings that steam gently as they appear, every meal is an event. And yet the Taste Reverser renders all of it a travesty. It weaponizes joy and transmutes it into confusion. Even the elves in the kitchens were reportedly deeply offended when they learned of the potion's effects, with one house elf named Bligsy refusing to serve food for a week after a Gryffindor prankster dosed a staff cauldron with the brew. The potion's composition is deceptively simple, which makes it especially dangerous in the hands of amateurs. It requires no rare ingredients: essence of licorice root, powdered cockroach cluster, vinegar of pickled eel skin, and a dash of powdered moonstone to stabilize the flavor inversion. Stirred counterclockwise for exactly 11 minutes and cooled over crushed ice, it looks innocuous, like watery porridge. But its effects last for hours, sometimes as many as 12, depending on the strength of the batch, and worse, it is not reversed by standard antidotes. Once ingested, the only cure is time, and even that passes slowly when your every bite is a betrayal. The magical properties of the potion suggest a charm woven deeply into its base, some form of sensory illusion that tricks the tongue but not the mind. Victims of the brew often recognize the food as familiar, but cannot override the warped taste. "I knew it was roast chicken," wrote Cedric Diggory in an old Charms essay, where he analyzed magical perception. "I saw it, smelled it, even felt the texture, but it tasted like ash. It was like my brain and mouth were at war." The experience creates a form of culinary dissonance that leads to psychological discomfort, often described as gastronomic horror. Some students report feeling betrayed not just by the food, but by their own senses. It is no surprise, then, that the potion was outlawed for student use by an edict from Professor McGonagall herself in her first year as headmistress. "We will not tolerate the undermining of Hogwarts's most sacred tradition, supper," the notice proclaimed, pinned to every common room door. Yet the potion's reputation only grew in infamy. Rumours swirled that Fred and George Weasley experimented with the formula during their final year, hoping to develop a line of joke sweets under their skiving snack box brand. Their early prototypes reportedly made Professor Flitwick cry into his toffee pudding, though he refused to confirm the story. "I've had enough surprises for one lifetime," he muttered to a fourth-year Ravenclaw who dared ask. More tragically, a seventh-year Slytherin named Ignatius Rookwood, no known relation to the Death Eater, suffered a severe case of dehydration after consuming the potion during his NEWT revision period. The potion affected not just solid food, but all liquids. His pumpkin juice became sour sludge, tea tasted like bile, and even water took on a flavour described as melted pennies soaked in regret. After 2 days of near starvation and vomiting, he was sent to the hospital wing, where Madame Pomfrey had to rehydrate him through spell-assisted vapour infusion. "He's lucky we caught it in time," she told the staff. "The boy nearly drowned trying to spit it all out." This incident alone should have cemented the potion's place in the restricted section, but magical curiosity is not so easily stifled. Every generation has its tinkerers and rebels. In 2013, the taste reverser resurfaced during a student-led exhibition on potions of philosophical interest. One exhibit, designed by a Ravenclaw prefect named Oriana Quickbeam, included a comparative analysis of the potion's influence on emotional memory. The result? An entire room of guests nibbling biscuits that tasted of grave dirt, sipping cider with the flavour of old socks, and pretending to find it intellectually stimulating. One professor fainted. Some have tried to assign deeper meaning to the potion. Magical ethicist Barnabas Blott argued in Wands and Wisdom that the potion serves as a metaphor for the unreliability of sensory experience and the perils of overindulgence. He posited that by sabotaging pleasure, the potion invites reflection. But even he admitted it's a hard lesson to learn on an empty stomach. Others, like herbology lecturer Professor Sprout, scoffed at this idea entirely. "You don't learn discipline by ruining pudding," she declared during a staff meeting. "You learn it by planting gillyweed in the rain." Despite its absurdity, the potion does offer intriguing magical insights. Its ability to alter taste on such a broad scale suggests enchantments targeting the gustatory cortex directly, likely a derivative of sensory transfiguration. It also demonstrates that magical interference with flavor is possible without affecting other food properties. Nutrients remain intact, spells to reveal toxins still function. In essence, only the subjective experience is altered. This raises questions about the ethical use of such magic. Could it be refined to help those with dietary needs? Could it curb sugar cravings or mask unpleasant medicines? But none of these practical uses have ever successfully materialized. The potion stubbornly resists refinement. Like a spiteful prankster, it refuses to be helpful. The fact that it's essentially useless hasn't deterred Hogwarts students from attempting to brew it in secret. One cauldron exploded in 2021 when a group of second years accidentally used sea salt instead of vinegar. The stench lingered for 3 weeks, described by Filch as a mixture of burnt marmalade and despair. The offenders were given detention polishing trophies without magic, a punishment made worse by the continued taste of brass lingering in their mouths for days. Even after the effects wore off, one of them swore she could no longer enjoy lemon drops. The potion also reveals a flaw in the otherwise wondrous world of magic. Some spells and brews are simply mistakes. They do not solve problems or reveal truths. They exist perhaps because magic is not always noble or functional. Sometimes it is folly. The taste reverser stands as a bitter reminder that not all experiments yield progress. Some produce only regret and sour soup. In one peculiar twist, an anonymous entry in the Hogwarts experimental potions logbook hinted that the potion might be useful in thwarting certain magical creatures. A scribbled note suggests that a lethifold known to be sensitive to sweet smells retreated from a tent where the potion had been spilled. Whether this was coincidence or magical interference remains unclear, but even if true, no one has been eager to test it again. Facing a lethifold with bad breath is still facing a lethifold. In the end, the taste reverser remains one of the great magical flukes, a spell without purpose, a potion without dignity. It robs the world of comfort and gives nothing in return. It is not even mischief at its best, lacking the cleverness of trick wands or the flair of a canary cream. It is simply unpleasant, and that perhaps is its most unique magic, the power to remind even the boldest witch or wizard that not all magic makes the world better. Some just make your butterbeer taste like vinegar. And no, Professor Dumbledore never endorsed its use, despite what some whisper. "Ah, music," he once said, "a magic beyond all we do here." He never said that about soup.